Keeping religion, no matter what your religion is, can be difficult. There can be times life throws you things like electric crossovers, one after the other, that you have to drive week in and week out. And then baby Jesus himself comes down from Mount Hebron and brings us something that is rear drive and manual transmission. And then all is right in the world. Okay, so depending on how you look at it, what has Moshe, Jeshua, Jah, Allah, who else I am not including on this, brought us? Well, an entirely new M2. Now you may be looking at this and thinking, that looks incredibly different, and yes it is, because the dimensions have changed. This is just a hair over 4 inches longer than the car it replaces. The wheelbase is about 2 inches longer, and then most importantly, as we will learn in this episode, the track is 1.5 inches wider. And that brings us to the obvious question. How does all this compare to the M4, at least from a dimensions perspective? The M4 is still a bit longer than this, but the M4 is also a donor car to important components like the subframes as well as the S58 engine. Which brings us to another obvious question, performance figures. So yes, this is a detuned version of the S58, but 0 to 60 respectable at 3.9 with the automatic or 4.1 with the manual transmission. VMAX, 155 bone stock. If you take the right trip down the options list, 177 miles an hour. Then another interesting tidbit with this change here, the wheels are now staggered sizes, so it's 19s in the front and 20s in the back. Then there's the aspect that absolutely slaps you in the face, and that is the design. Yes, I am one of the few people that really likes this design, as I did in the M240. That car was magnificent to drive. This just takes it to another level. I would argue this is bordering on more boy racer, something that looks wider, not just because of the extra dimensions, but what they've done to the front of the car. And why is that? 2 little-known design tricks. Notice the grille, which I know many of you do not like. It's wider, as well as the slats are horizontal, not vertical. That's a trick to make any car look wider. And then there's the pornography of it. It's got hips, it's got haunches, it's got fenders. That's what makes it stand out from lesser M240s on which it's based. Right off the bat, here's a spot of good news. This is one of the very few sorta light cars you and I get to drive. 3,814 pounds, or depending express your weights and measures, 1,730 kilograms. Now, a couple of interesting points. Number one, if this were an automatic, it would be about 50 pounds heavier. If this were the most basic M4, it'd be about 60 pounds heavier. However, the M4 CSL we just drove with a lot more power. That's 154 pounds lighter. With that. Oh yes, it is very good to be home. This delivers power exactly as we expected from the M4 being, it's the same engine. The thing is, if I'm a guy who runs product or marketing at BMW, I've got to believe that this is too close for comfort, because the power delivery here, it not only feels the same way, it feels almost as quick. Now, yes, there is a big difference when you go up to the competition. That's where you feel the difference more. In terms of the transmission, this BMW, they know how to do manual transmissions. It's not something like a Miata where the shifts are very short and it feels super light. There's some weight to the shift action. You feel like you are interacting with the car in a way that this is an old school BMW. And really, that's the difference in the way this delivers power over the M4. It was once said, with great power comes great responsibility. Maybe not in a specific religious text, but the concept does apply here. The great power is the engine, but But what's the responsibility? That's the structure of the vehicle, and it's not just like a BMW thing, it's whatever kind of performance car that is. Here, BMW does add more structure to balance out the power. In this case, not one, but 3 strut braces, and that works in conjunction with structure underneath the vehicle, like a shearing plate underneath the rear subframe. Why is that important? Well, think about the structure. If it's wobbly going down the road, the vehicle is not going to handle very well. Okay, so the theory of all this is great, but where does it come together? Well, by bringing all of these small disparate changes, it means the suspension doesn't have to do all the work of making the car sharper going around corners. Okay, let's kick off our discussion regarding driving dynamics on a closed road in Arizona with that. Thank you, Arizona DPS. First and foremost, you do not notice the extra length. Yeah, there's more length and there's wheelbase that's increased here. There is no discernible impact on the way this drives. The width, that's something different. That's something you notice. That extra track, this car feels significantly more planted than the M2 that came before it, and that is indeed a good thing. Like, there had an elevation change, and the car doesn't feel disturbed. That's one of the biggest differences between this and the M4. So this is my very long-winded way of saying what you've seen on the internet forums, that this car is too large and they're ruining it, is complete crap. This, if anything, makes life more difficult for the most basic M4. Then layered on top of all of that is significant flexibility in the traction control, the stability control, the engine management system. You see, what BMW does is have all the bits talk to each other. Other manufacturers, believe it or not, don't do this. So while I was here, I spent a lot of time talking to the head of all of R&D for BMW M GmbH, and he gave me some insight onto how the system works. I can't even pronounce it. But what it does is it makes everything more flexible, everything more responsive. So instead of having a traction control system that goes on or off or has a sport mode, this has 10 different settings. And they do that by controlling all of the disparate chassis systems through the engine management system because it can run faster. Speaking of adjustments, we can also fool with the brakes. Right now I've got it set up on sport mode. Let's go into setup, and I can bring it down to comfort. Now, do I notice a difference? Let's try this. I honestly can't tell you there's a huge difference in the brake pedal feel or the brake performance, but then again, I haven't spent enough time stop and go traffic or on roads like this to understand this. My guess is this is something that the owner of the car would understand. I would really be interested in your feedback, those who actually get these cars, to give me some understanding of how this works on a daily basis, owning the car for, say, over a year. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game of mine, the options game, with today's contestant. The kind of car that can make a non-believer see religion. The 2023 BMW M2 for a base price of $62,200. This one is finished in Toronto red. We do not have to pay extra for it. On this drive, they also had the Sanford Blue, which is the car we shot in the tech review, as well as the Brooklyn Gray we've shot on an M4. Then there's only one factory option fitted to this car. It is called the driver's package, and it brings about 3 changes. Number 1, it deletes the standard factory moonroof and replaces it with a carbon fiber roof that lowers the weight high in the car by 13 pounds. Number 2, it changes the seats from the regular M seats to the carbon fiber buckets we've seen in M4s, the M5, and we recently saw them installed in an M8 at the Chicago Auto Show. Then it brings about the most important change, the VMAX. It goes from 155 miles an hour to 177 miles an hour. You can have all of this for the low, low price of $9,900. Now, for the avoidance of doubt, one can have the carbon fiber seats as a standalone option. One can also have the car with a sunroof with a manual transmission. The only other thing we add is the destination and handling from, I'm going to butcher this, San Luis Potosi, $995, which brings us to a total retail price of $73,095. Put another way, about the base price of an M4, the most basic one. Now that you and I have gone through the build sheet of this specific car, a fascinating observation. These feel significantly stiffer than the car they replace. All of the bits we have discussed throughout this episode, it's the aggregate of those items that make the track more noticeable, but not the extra length. Okay, so what have we learned today? I would argue two things. Number one, this is far too close for comfort to the base M4. And number two, if you're going to complain that it's too big, it's too heavy, buy a GR86 or a Cayman. Don't complain about this. Which brings us to the wish list. And here, can we get to the special editions that we know are going to come of this? And I'm thinking, let's take 500 pounds out of it, but not make it 100 grand. But I am just one man. This is the point of the episode where I turn this around to you to opine in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all word, MotoManTV all word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, if you got value out of this episode, I would greatly appreciate you sharing them with all your friends on your socials. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.